Somewhere in your refrigerator right now, there is a container of leftovers you are planning to reheat tonight. Rice, maybe, or chicken, or last night's spinach. You will heat it until it looks hot enough, and you will eat it without a second thought, because that is what almost every human being on Earth does every single day. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Heating food until it looks and smells done does not mean it is chemically the same food you cooked the first time. Something changes inside that container while it sits in your fridge, and something changes again the moment you put it back under heat. Most of those changes are invisible. You cannot see them, taste them, or smell them, but your body notices. Public health researchers have spent decades studying the connection between diet and long-term disease risk, including cancer. Groups like the World Health Organization and the International Agency for Research on Cancer have classified specific compounds that form in food, not the food itself, but certain byproducts created during storage and reheating as carcinogenic or probably carcinogenic to humans. These are not fringe theories. They are documented findings published in real scientific journals. And yet, almost nobody explains this in a way that is actually useful at the dinner table. Today, we are going to fix that. We are going to look closely at 4 foods sitting in millions of refrigerators right now, foods most people consider safe, healthy, even virtuous, and we are going to walk through exactly what happens to them when they are reheated, using real, verifiable science rather than fear for its own sake. It is worth pausing on why this even matters at a population level. Cancer is not usually caused by one dramatic exposure. It develops gradually, over years, through the slow accumulation of cellular damage, small mutations, chronic inflammation, and stress on the systems your body uses to repair itself. Diet is one of the few daily repeated exposures most of us have real control over, which is exactly why researchers keep coming back to it. You cannot control the air quality in your city or the chemicals used decades ago in manufacturing near your home, but you can control how you store and reheat the food sitting in your own kitchen tonight. That is the entire premise of this video, not to frighten you away from food, but to hand you specific, evidence-based habits that cost nothing and take no extra time. Before we get to the 4 foods, it helps to understand why reheating is different from cooking. The first time you cook something, heat causes proteins to unfold, starches to soften, and fats to change structure in fairly predictable, well-understood ways. That is normal cooking chemistry, and it is not dangerous. The problem begins during the in-between stage, the hours the food spends cooling on the counter or sitting in the refrigerator. During that window, 3 things can happen depending on the food. Fats and proteins exposed to oxygen slowly become unstable through a process called oxidation. Sugars and proteins can rearrange into new compounds when they are heated a second time, a chemical pathway related to the same reaction that browns toast, sometimes producing byproducts your body has to work harder to process. And in certain vegetables, naturally occurring nitrate compounds can be converted by bacteria into nitrite, which under the right conditions can go on to form nitrosamines, a class of compounds with a well-established link to cancer risk when consumed in significant amounts over time, mainly through processed and cured meats. Keep those 3 ideas in mind: oxidation, second heat rearrangement, and nitrate conversion, because you will see them again as we go food by food. Let's start with rice, because more people eat it than almost anything else on the planet. Rice is a staple for billions of people, and leftover rice, reheated the next day, is one of the most common meals in the world. The real risk with rice has almost nothing to do with the reheating itself and everything to do with what happens before you reheat it. Raw rice can naturally carry spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. Cooking kills the active bacteria, but the spores can survive, and if cooked rice is left out at room temperature or stored too long, those spores can wake up and multiply, producing a toxin called cereulide. This is the critical detail almost nobody knows. Cereulide is heat stable. That means reheating your rice, even reheating it thoroughly, does not destroy it. Laboratory research has shown that cereulide interferes directly with the mitochondria inside human cells, essentially disrupting the tiny power plants that keep your cells running. In serious, high-dose cases, this toxin has been linked to acute liver damage. And researchers who study cellular stress note that mitochondrial disruption is one of the pathways scientists watch closely when they study how cells become damaged over time. To be clear and honest with you, the dominant, well-documented risk from Bacillus cereus is food poisoning, sometimes severe, not a proven direct cause of cancer, and I'm not going to pretend the evidence says more than it does. But there is a second separate concern with rice worth knowing. Repeatedly heating starchy foods at high temperatures can increase the formation of acrylamide, a compound the International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies as probably carcinogenic to humans. So what should you actually do? Cool rice quickly within about an hour of cooking. Refrigerate it right away in a shallow container so it cools evenly. Eat leftovers within a day and reheat rice only once, thoroughly, and never let it sit warm on the counter for hours before you eat it. One more detail worth knowing, restaurants and buffets are actually a bigger risk factor here than most home kitchens, simply because large batches of rice cool slowly and often sit at warm, bacteria-friendly temperatures for extended stretches before anyone reheats or serves them. If you are ever unsure how long a rice dish has been sitting out, that uncertainty alone is a good enough reason to be cautious, regardless of how hot it looks when it is finally served. Now let's talk about chicken, because this is the one that surprises health-conscious people the most. Chicken breast is the default protein for anyone trying to eat clean, build muscle, or lose weight. It is lean, versatile, and recommended by nearly every dietitian on the planet. The concern here is not the chicken itself. It is what happens when cooked meat is exposed to high heat a second time. When muscle proteins are heated repeatedly at high temperatures, they can form compounds called heterocyclic amines. This is genuinely one of the more studied areas in dietary cancer research, not a fringe claim. Heterocyclic amines are formed when amino acids, sugars, and creatine react under intense heat, and studies going back decades have connected high dietary exposure to heterocyclic amines, especially from meat that is charred, well done, or repeatedly reheated at high temperatures, with increased markers of DNA damage in laboratory and observational studies. The honest caveat is important here too. Much of the strongest evidence comes from very high-temperature cooking methods like grilling and pan-searing meat until it is heavily browned, and reheating adds an additional, smaller round of that same heat exposure on top of the original cooking. Alongside this, the fats in cooked chicken can undergo lipid oxidation when reheated, producing byproducts like malondialdehyde, which researchers use as a marker of oxidative stress in the body. None of this means chicken is dangerous. It means how you reheat it matters. The practical fix is simple. Reheat chicken gently at lower temperatures, just enough to bring it to a safe eating temperature rather than searing it again. Better yet, eat leftover chicken cold in a salad or wrap, which avoids the second heat exposure entirely. This is not an argument against eating chicken, and it is not an argument against meal prepping, which remains one of the most effective tools for eating consistently well. It is simply a case for changing how you bring that chicken back to temperature. A short stint in a low oven, a few minutes in a covered pan on low heat, or serving it cold does the same job as blasting it in a microwave without the extra round of high heat protein and fat breakdown that a second aggressive reheating cycle can add. Food number 3 might be the most surprising because it is a vegetable that almost every nutritionist tells you to eat more of. Spinach, along with other nitrate-rich greens like beets, celery, and Swiss chard, is genuinely excellent for you when eaten fresh. These vegetables are loaded with iron, folate, and antioxidants, and the natural nitrates they contain actually support healthy blood flow and blood pressure when consumed fresh. The problem is timing. Once spinach is cooked and then stored in the refrigerator, naturally occurring bacteria on the leaves can begin converting those nitrates into nitrites, the same chemical conversion that happens in cured meats like bacon and deli ham. This is why the World Health Organization's warnings about nitrite-related compounds in processed meat are relevant here too, because the underlying chemistry is similar. When that stored nitrite-converted spinach is reheated, the nitrites can react with naturally occurring amino compounds to form nitrosamines, which are considered among the more potent carcinogens identified in food science. based on both animal studies and long-term population research linking high nitrosamine exposure to stomach and colorectal cancer risk. The irony is real. One of the healthiest vegetables on the planet can become a source of concerning compounds simply because of how long it sat in your fridge before you reheated it. European food safety authorities have specifically flagged this reheating pattern in leafy greens as worth public attention. So here is what actually helps. Cook spinach and similar greens fresh and eat them the same day whenever you can. If you do have leftovers, eat them cold within a few hours rather than reheating them, and avoid letting cooked greens sit in the fridge for more than a day before you use them up. This same caution applies loosely to other nitrate-rich vegetables you might batch cook for the week, including beet greens and celery, especially if you are someone who cooks a large tray of greens on Sunday and eats from it daily. Rotating in fresh-cooked portions throughout the week, rather than reheating one large batch repeatedly, is a simple way to sidestep the issue almost entirely. Which brings us to food number 4, the one almost nobody sees coming: eggs. Eggs are about as close to a nutritional powerhouse as food gets. They contain complete protein, choline for brain health, selenium, and antioxidants that protect your eyes. Nutritionally, eggs deserve their reputation. The issue is specifically about reheating, particularly reheating scrambled eggs or egg dishes in a microwave. Egg yolks contain cholesterol and fat, and when that fat is heated once, cooled, then heated again, it can undergo a second, faster round of oxidation. One of the byproducts researchers have studied here is a group of compounds called oxysterols, which are oxidized forms of cholesterol. A number of published reviews describe oxysterols as having pro-inflammatory and, in laboratory cell studies, potentially genotoxic effects, meaning they can damage genetic material inside cells under certain conditions. This is an area of ongoing research rather than settled science, and the doses and conditions used in laboratory studies do not always map directly onto a home-cooked, reheated omelet, so I want to be careful not to overstate it. What is clear is that repeated heating changes egg proteins as well, causing them to form denser structures that are somewhat harder to digest and can put mild additional oxidative stress on the digestive tract, something researchers have connected more broadly to gut inflammation over time. The fix here is easy: eat eggs fresh whenever you can. If you are meal prepping hard-boiled eggs, keep the shells on until you eat them, and eat them cold rather than reheated. If you need to warm an egg dish, use gentle, low, indirect heat, like a warm water bath, rather than blasting it in a microwave. If you love a big Sunday batch of scrambled eggs or a breakfast burrito prep for the week, you do not have to give that up. You simply want to warm those portions slowly, covered on low heat, rather than microwaving them on high until they are steaming, which is the exact combination of speed and intensity that pushes oxidation the furthest. Step back and look at the pattern across all 4 foods, because it is more useful than any single fact. Rice teaches you that storage time matters more than reheating temperature. Chicken teaches you that gentle reheating beats aggressive reheating. Spinach teaches you that some vegetables are best eaten fresh rather than stored and reheated at all. And eggs teach you that even nutrient-dense, universally recommended foods can be handled in ways that quietly work against you. None of this means you need to fear your refrigerator. It means small, specific habits: cooling food quickly, reheating gently, eating certain vegetables the same day, and choosing cold leftovers when reheating is not necessary, can meaningfully reduce your long-term exposure to compounds that researchers have linked, with varying strength of evidence, to increased cellular stress and cancer risk. Some of this evidence is strong and well established, like the heat stability of cereulide toxin in rice and the classification of acrylamide as a probable carcinogen. Some of it is still developing, like the exact role of oxysterols in reheated eggs. Good science communication means telling you the difference, instead of flattening everything into the same level of certainty just to make a more dramatic story. If you take one thing away from this, let it be this: plan your portions so you create fewer leftovers in the first place. Cool food quickly instead of letting it sit out. Reheat gently rather than blasting it on high. And for a small handful of foods, especially leafy greens like spinach, treat cold leftovers as the safer default rather than the reheated version. These are not dramatic lifestyle changes. They are small adjustments that fit into the way you already cook and eat, and they are grounded in real published research rather than guesswork. Preventive health rarely comes from one big decision. It comes from dozens of small, informed ones, made consistently over years. Now you know exactly which ones matter most in your own kitchen. Think about how many meals move through your kitchen in a single week, and how many of those involve something being cooled, stored, then heated back up a day or two later. It adds up to hundreds of small decisions a year, and almost none of us were ever taught the difference between a harmless reheat and one worth rethinking. That gap between what the science actually shows and what most people were taught growing up is exactly where habits quietly form, for better or worse. Closing that gap does not require a special diet, an expensive gadget, or giving up any of these foods. It just requires knowing which small choices, cooling rice quickly, warming chicken gently, eating spinach the same day, keeping eggs cold until you need them, actually make a measurable difference over time.